Hi, I'm Andrew. I am an interactive fiction designer, and oh, I can see my slides. That's exciting. Um, I have, there it is. There's me. Okay, so I have a history in puzzle games. I have done actually a lot of random things, but today I want to talk about a particular aspect of puzzle games. Well, I also like almost getting over a cold, so I apologize if I cough. I'll try to mute, and I'll probably miss the button, and you'll hear me cough. Just bear with me. So a particular aspect of puzzle games, which is fractal puzzle games, except that we don't really have a name for it. I made that up. You could say zooming, you could say scaling, you could say puzzle games that scale up or scale down. I think it's a thing that we've thought about, but haven't really talked about, so there isn't a name for it. I'm going to try to give some examples, and then we can pin down what we're thinking about, and maybe in the future this will lead to discussions about more detailed discussions about what this particular thing actually is. So let us scroll back to 1978. A thing that happened in 1978, my father worked for a tech company, so I got a chance to play this game, Colossal Cave. It actually didn't look like this. I think I was playing on a teletype. There might have been a terminal window, but it wasn't white. Anyway, I got very excited about this game. I was 8 years old, and I wanted to play it for the rest of my life. So I did. A couple of years later, we got an Apple II. We got Colossal Cave. It was called Microsoft Adventure for reasons that I won't get into. And we got Zork, and we got some of the Scott Adams games. And I played these games for my entire childhood and growing up. And then when I grew up, I wrote a bunch. So that's the story of my life. Here's another thing that happened in 1978. I saw this movie. It's called Powers of 10 by Charles and Ray Eames. It's a short film about the scale of the universe. This is a photo which is 1 meter wide. That's 10 meters wide. And it just keeps going. The movie came out in 1977. I actually saw a prototype version that was made in 1968. It keeps going. The movie was playing in a loop at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., and I was completely hypnotized by it. I did not watch it for the rest of my life, but I did think about it a lot. So what do these two things, interactive fiction and Powers of 10, have to do with each other? Possibly nothing. But maybe something, because a few years ago, actually it was 15 years ago, which is scary, I got the idea to make this game, Hadean Lands, which is a text adventure, same style as Colossal Cave, and it's got the theme of zooming. Well, okay, so here's why I cough, I'm sorry. We're good. I'm not going to get into an entire description of the game, but it's a time loop game, it's a puzzle game, and it's about slides. It's about alchemy. It's a game where you cast spells, you make potions, and you perform rituals. And you make them at each ingredient, each ritual is performed with a set of ingredients, and some ingredients are rare. That is to say, you only have one dose. You can only use it once in the game. On the flip side, some of the puzzles in the game are have multiple solutions. So there are several spells or potions or rituals that you can use to get past that particular obstacle. And therefore, you wind up having to try different combinations. You have to like make one set of things, try getting through things, then you realize you run out of something, so you have to start over. That's why it's a time loop game. And I wanted to make the idea of the time loop like not boring, like going back and resolving the early part of a game shouldn't be boring. So I built a kind of auto solver where every time you restart, you keep your knowledge of recipes. And so you can just type like create potion, and the game is going to go and find all the pieces, all the ingredients that you need to make that particular recipe. And if you need to solve a puzzle to get a particular ingredient, it'll solve that puzzle. So here is a case where you type, I typed open door, and opening the door requires a key, getting the key requires like blah, blah, blah. So the game just like goes through the entire tree of prerequisites to get the key, does all the things, get all the items, runs back to the door and unlock it. And that's one command. So what happens as a result of this is that you start out playing a game of finding recipes and collecting recipes. But as you play, it slowly morphs into a game about using the recipes, and each recipe is just one move you can make. It becomes a game about resource management, like trying to get to the things that you need without running out of resources. And the puzzle steps are no longer individual ritual actions, but entire rituals. And then eventually it scales out even more. There's a third stage. It's not like full on third stage, but there's a bit of a third level where you're trying to repair parts of the starship. There's a starship, sorry, I didn't mention. And every time you repair part of the ship, some passages become easier to traverse, or some obstacles go away, or some parts of the ship become connected that weren't connected before. So now you can get to a different place in the ship using fewer spells, which means using fewer ingredients. And now it becomes a game of trying to get to more places in the ship in one loop. And eventually when you put enough pieces together and find enough paths, you become able to like reach the entire ship in a single loop without restarting because you have optimized your resource usage. So the point is that as you play the game, like the lower levels kind of disappear and you're just playing an entirely new game that wasn't there before. So what other games, I don't want to just talk about my game the whole time, what other kinds of games are there that have had this kind of scaling model? Well, here's an example. Baba Is You needs no introduction. This is a screenshot from the end game. So this is like, spoilers if you haven't gotten that far. If you haven't gotten that far, you have no idea what you're looking at. But at this point in the game, like you're diving into levels, you're turning the level into a thing and then like moving the thing around on the overworld map and using that to get farther into the overworld map, solving the meta level. So it's exactly the same as the Hadean Lands idea, except instead of recipes made of recipes, it's map tiles made of map tiles. Actually, map tiles as a puzzle element is a pretty popular idea. A lot of games have used it. Here's just a very abbreviated sample of games that have had this general idea. Like you go into a level, you solve a level, or you do a thing that's one square on the map, and then you zoom out and look at the map, and maybe you rearrange the map, or maybe you do other things. But there's a meta level puzzle which is organized around the individual map tiles and what they did. I'm sure you can think of many more examples of this. Interestingly, I'm going to go on a little tangent here. Myst almost has this idea, not quite. If you think about Myst is a game where you jump into a game level, an age, a world, and solve something and then jump back out into the overworld. You're jumping into books rather than map tiles, but the same idea, almost. It so happens that in Myst, you can't pick up, it doesn't have the idea of picking up map tiles and moving them around. You can't pick up a book. The interface just doesn't give you an option to pick up a book. All you can do with a book is open and close it and touch it. If you think about the idea of picking up a book and how it would play into the game, it would actually completely destroy the plot, which is kind of funny. Like if you could pick up a book in the game of Myst, you could like bypass all the collecting pages and stuff. You could just like go straight to Atris and hand them a fully functional linking book and say, here you go. Game solved, which is why if you play the recent remake of Myst, all the books are bolted down. I'm pretty sure that they thought of this too and realized that the plot just doesn't make sense. So Myst doesn't go there, but you can see how you can make a game that is set in the Myst sort of using the Myst mechanics that does go there, which would be kind of neat. So that's enough examples to get started with. I'm trying to abstract the basic concept, which is that you're playing a game And as you're playing, you discover a new level of the game that you didn't see from the beginning. It's not just a matter of a thing made of smaller things, right? Hadean Lands is recipes made of recipes, but if you play like there's casual games like Doodle God where you start with a small number of elements and make more elements and make more elements and make more elements, and it goes on and on and on. In the case of Neil's Infinite Fun, it goes on forever. That's not what we're talking about. That has the concept of scaling, but it doesn't have the surprise because you pretty much know how it's going to go the entire thing, the entire way through. It doesn't have that Metroid Brainia moment of saying, "Oh my God, there's a whole new thing here that I couldn't see that was staring me right in the face," which I love. Like that's the element that I love about it. Another key element. Do I have the right slide? Yes. When you play, as you go farther and farther, the original game that you're playing should sort of disappear from your consciousness. This is how you know you're playing a whole new game. You stop thinking about, or rather, you're still thinking about the original moves, but you're thinking about them in terms of single elements. It's condensed down to an abstracted item, which is now a single element of the game that you're now playing. Sorry, that's moving. Which brings up why the difference between this and the simple element combination games. It's not that you're making things out of smaller things. It's that you're making actions out of smaller actions. And this is why Baba Is You is such a great example, because everything in Baba is a word, and a word is a command. It's a thing you can do. So let's try to pull out more examples. What are tools or actions you can make out of smaller ones? Well, one example is electronics. It's the nature of electronics that you make a very simple device, and then you put some of those together and make a more complicated device. You put those together and make an even more complicated device. And there's actually a bunch of games based on this. Like where you start with an AND gate, and then you make like AND OR and XOR gates, and you make a flip-flop, and then you make a counter, and then you make a 4-bit adder, and so forth. And you work all the way up to making complicated things. This is actually a very old idea in games. This is an example from, again, from the Apple II, Robot Odyssey, a game that I loved and actually managed to solve. And as you see, it's made up of logic gates. There's a little NOT gate up there, but you can also cram a bunch of logic gates together into a chip. The blue thing in the center is a chip which contains several gates which allow the robot that it's wired to do things. And then you can put chips inside other chips up to a point, right? It's an Apple II game. I think it was written in AppleSoft BASIC. So they can only go so far with it. The signal delays were actually pretty bad. And the complexity topped out pretty quick. But that they were able to do it at all is pretty impressive. And it wasn't a very fair game, but it was a great game. Excuse me. So there's more modern games that have this idea. Here's a quick list that I pulled out. As you might see, like the second one says Nanta Tetris, is just literally what that is. It's a lesson plan that starts with, not really a game, but starts with the idea of, okay, here's the NAND gate, and you put things together, and as you go through the whole sequence, and you wind up with a complete playable game. The downside of this concept is that we only really have one set of electronics. I mean, there's fantasy consoles that are made that like have imaginary architectures, but they're still made of logic gates. We've only invented one really good system for making one system of logical operators that we use to make everything. No one's invented like a fake one that they could use in a game. So the field of electronics is kind of like you can make a lot of games there, but in some sense they're going to all look pretty similar until you get into quantum computing, and yeah, there's games like that too. But let's not get too far off track. There's one more idea that I want to pull into this concept, which is, I said that the lower layer gets out of your way, but it shouldn't entirely disappear from your consciousness. You should still have to have it in the back of your mind. That's where the game gets where the game becomes mind expanding, right? Where you have to hold more and more in your head because the details matter. In an electronics game, maybe the signal delays are important. In Hadean Lands, maybe you made a recipe wrong and you have to like remake the recipe using a substitution to free up one more ingredient. So having to keep the entire scope in mind is part of what makes a puzzle game great. So I don't want to like eliminate it from this concept. And we should always be able to call back to the lower labels and zoom back down and take a peek. Not all the time, because if you're doing it all the time, then playing the game takes exponential time and then you stop playing. That's not good. You want to mostly move up the scale, but occasionally peek down to the lower level. Baba as you does this really well, by the way. So what other ways could we construct a game that works this way? Say in an electronics game, imagine there's a game where each level is like a route. Signals go in one side and go out another side. And when you solve the level, signals go through, and then there's an overworld where the map tiles are connected edge to edge, and paths go through the entire map. An example of this from a few years ago was Solas 128, a game which has a great soundtrack, by the way. You can see that each square is like part of a path, and the paths form these large things. Add to this idea the idea that you're making tools rather than just solving map tiles. That is, you create map tiles and then you can pick them up and put them in your backpack and go to somewhere else where you need to use a bunch of routing elements and put them back down. So now it's a game like this, but entirely you're thinking in the mode of tools that you have available. And occasionally you have to go down and tweak the way a tool works. Maybe there's like more things that happen. Maybe you discover halfway through the game that there's an element of color filters, and you can enter an AND gate or like an elbow or a bend or a fork and like stick a filter in there and change the color of the current that flows through it. Or like I said, signal delays, maybe there's like quantum interference, I don't know. So now like you're halfway through the game and you suddenly have to rethink about every tool that you have and think about more ways to apply it. That's always an excellent moment in the game. We try to aim for that sort of stuff. So I'm not designing something here. I'm just spinning out ideas. The important thing is that you should always have to have the lower level details in your brain, even if you're mostly not working at that level. I'm going to give one more example, which is what if you use this sort of scaling structure in a narrative game as opposed to a puzzle game, or given that it's me talking, a narrative puzzle game. So you've got a choice-based game, like ordinary choice-based menus, like a dialogue, like a twine-based sort of game. And it's things that you're doing today. You're at home, you take actions, like you interact with your friends. The day finishes, you've made some choices, there's an outcome. That affects what happens among your group of friends, the people living near you on your street over the course of the next few days, over the course of this week. That becomes a move in a larger game. And the larger game is, what does your group of friends do this week on your street? You make choices, but you make choices as a group. And the result of that, as you play through the week, is going to have more outcomes, and that has going to affect what happens this month in your neighborhood, in a larger area. And then that's a larger game, and you play some moves at that game, and that's going to affect the outcomes of what happens in your city this year. So we have the scaling levels, but it's like a game of social action rather than solving puzzles. You can put in puzzles too. You want to, of course, keep the idea of going back down to the smaller level. Maybe things that happen in your neighborhood this month give you more options. Like you discover a new thing you could do yourself personally at home. And so you zoom back down to the initial day where it's just you at home. You can do one more thing. And that means that there could be one more outcome for what happens on your street, which means there could be one more outcome for what happens in your neighborhood. And therefore, the whole game expands. The game could expand a lot. This is a neat idea for a structure. I've had it in my head for a while, and I haven't written it. I'm putting it out there so that someone else can write it for me. Or maybe I'll finally get off my butt and work on it as a result of doing this talk. I don't know. I'm just sketching ideas here. Anyway, that's pretty much the whole talk that I had. I have described a thing, I've given some examples, and maybe that's enough detail for us to talk more in the future about this sort of thing. Thank you for listening. I will be around for the next on the Discord for questions.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Andrew. I can confirm that was completely different to the other metapuzzles talk that we had. So it was great to have you speaking with us. Are you happy to take a couple of questions now as well?
Certainly.
Sure. One thing that I've encountered is people saying something to the effect of like, because of the because metapuzzles and the zooming out and out has become a common trope, I guess, of Thinky games. There's sometimes an expectation that players have of coming into a game that if it doesn't have that, you're not going to have that like mind-expanding experience. How do you feel about that? Do you go into games with that kind of expectation? Does it bother you when a game doesn't have this?
I mean, I'm greedy. I want every game to have everything.
Yeah.
I want every game to be wonderful. That's not to say you can't write a perfectly good game which is just a whole lot of puzzle levels. Mm-hmm. I think we can frame stuff like this is something that you learn when you look at the Steam page of a game or the itch page of a game. Yeah. It's going to give you an idea of where it's going. That's not spoilers. That's just like giving you the correct expectation about the scope of the game, which is important. I'm not sure if there's anything else to say. Failed expectations will really screw up somebody's play experience. We've known that for a long time.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you. So then one thing that was funny that came up in the chat is when you were talking about Myst and if you could pick up the books in Myst, it would completely break the game. Somebody mentioned if you could pick up the books in Myst and then you could like go into other books with the book that you picked up, you'd suddenly have a game like Recursed or Patrick's Paradox.
Yes, or Cocoon was another one.
Cocoon, yeah, exactly. So I guess there are also those are examples of games that do this, but allow you to mix the layers. It's not just about having a layer above the other.
Definitely. If Cyan ever hires me, that's what I'm going to make.
So in your experience in the games that you've made, what are the challenges of designing something that's like in that kind of space?
Well, obviously the problem of having a game which is mind expanding is that the author has to expand their mind farther in order to make it.
Sure.
And you wind up with a large number of notes. When I was working on Hadean Lands, I actually built, quite separate from the in-game goal solver, I had to write a separate like goal exploration solver to verify that the game wasn't broken, which was a headache because the tool that I was using, which was Inform 7, didn't integrate very well with my tool, and I wound up like doing repeating a lot of work, repeating a lot of logic, just to verify that everything would like become possible in the right order and not like have trivial solutions. Automated solving tools are a wonderful talk, which I hope somebody else gives at this conference.
Yep, in fact, we just had one from Alistair that talks about using constraint satisfaction.
I've been busy all day and I have not had a chance to watch all the talks. I will absolutely catch up tonight. I feel terrible having missed all these things.
At the end of that talk, we did chat about how like possibly like use it, like if you get into like maybe if your game is so mind expanding that you have to use a constraint satisfaction problem in order to model it, maybe it's too complicated at that point.
No, it's absolutely not, because you know that there is some player out there who is going to eat it up. The terrible thing about being a puzzle designer, a lot of your audience is smarter than you are.
Interesting. That's a fun way of thinking about it, because I think the way people approach that is they think, well, the designer in theory has a more in-depth knowledge of the system than the players do because they've exposed themselves to it. Like at first, yes, that's true. I assume you have situations where you've like players have found interesting consequences of games you've made. That
like my constraint solver actually had a bug, and someone said, "Hey, there's this place where you can't quite do the thing," and I said, "Oh, damn it!" But I thought that was a problem in Hadean Lands, and I wound up saying, it's artistically it's kind of okay. I'm going to leave it in, but it was definitely definitely an unexpected bug.
Nice. We also just, speaking of Patrick's Parabox, we just had a question from Patrick as well in the chat. So the question is, in the diagnosis, is that structure the point? Like, should we be trying to replicate this formula, but just in different ways? Or how would you phrase the goal if I want to make a zooming game?
This is still at the descriptive phase rather than the prescriptive phase.
Mhm.
I don't know everything that goes into here, that goes into this model. I haven't found every example. I will switch into the chat right after this, and people can suggest more games that I haven't thought of. But it is definitely to be enhancing the model rather than using it as a recipe right now.
Great, thank you so much. That's the last question we'll take. So we'll now get set up for the next talk. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good night.